Hello and welcome. My name is Robert Opp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the United Nations Development Program.
Good day, everyone. Hello, my name is Adlai Goldberg, and I lead innovation for our health sciences and wellness practice here at EY.
And we're pleased to welcome you to the Istanbul Innovation Days, UNDP's flagship event on innovation for development. In 2021, we're focusing on urban shifts, transformation, and narratives that fuel it. Now, our discussion today is on accelerating the future of technology partnerships. And this is one of 3 future framing sessions leading up to the Istanbul Innovation Days main event on the 23rd to 25th of March. We've been joined in this journey by our partner EY, who has helped us in organizing and hosting the future framing sessions. EY is a long-term partner with UNDP and specifically has helped us to produce these sessions. We're so grateful for their support. Adlai?
Thank you, Rob. I want to welcome everyone to this exciting 2-hour program that explores how we might transform development and define a blueprint for a greener, more inclusive economy through technology partnerships. To do so, we have lined up an engaging group of people that starts with a keynote by Dr. David Singay, Sierra Leone's first ever Chief Innovation Officer and Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education. Dr. Singay will share his vision for where Sierra Leone is heading with technology and technology partnerships to move Sierra Leone towards a greener, more inclusive economy. Following Dr. Singay, we have a panel discussion hosted by Pascal Finette, co-founder of Singularity University. This panel will explore how local economies can accelerate innovation ecosystems and how PPP, public-private partnerships, can foster them. On his global panel is an economist, an explorer, a government innovator, an inventor, and a grassroots entrepreneur. And in a change of direction, we have our first fireside chat between the public and private sector, exploring the roles of policy and technology and how those 2 things work together. And to close, our second fireside chat explores how to accelerate innovation in the global south with a conversation between an entrepreneur and an NGO that's enabling this. Before we jump into the next session, Rob, would you mind setting the stage for how technology partnerships have the opportunity to truly impact and transform development?
Thanks, Adlai. And just to give a bit of context, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered, among other things, a radical shift to the development paradigm. Nowhere is this more evident than in the role digital technologies have played in response to the crisis. As COVID-19 became a global pandemic, governments, business, and people everywhere turned to digital technologies for medical care, employment, public services, and even daily social interactions. However, the crisis also revealed the devastating reality of the digital divide. Access to these technologies remains unequal and exclusive, as around half the world's population lacks meaningful access to the internet. This digital divide is particularly stark across already marginalized groups: women, rural communities, the elderly, and others. Facing these challenges will require us to rethink and reframe development itself to ensure that we leave no one behind in the digital age. And partnerships are critical to this effort. Technology partnerships allow us to get the expertise from the people best placed in the world to provide it and deliver it to those who are most in need. I'm very much looking forward to the next 2 hours of discussions. Adlai?
Thanks, Rob. Let's get going. And let's first hear from Dr. David Singay and the work he's doing in Sierra Leone to really move his country towards a greener, more inclusive economy through technology partnerships. Dr. David Singay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, I think when we think about local economy ecosystems or greener ecosystems or inclusion in that, we're talking about the future. Some people like to think that that's the future, but I think that's what we should be talking about now. This is about our future depends on it. Our future depends on a world that we like to think about radically inclusive. That means we stop at nothing to lift all barriers. Some of those barriers can be legal, some of those barriers can be infrastructural, some of those barriers can be institutional, policy, regulations, culture, practice, but anything that eliminates people, particularly women and young women, from engaging in inclusive development we need to address those, and that's what we call radical inclusion. And His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio of Sierra Leone also talks about inclusive development. And when we talk about inclusive development, it's that whether it's in the capital Freetown or an urban area or far, far, far beyond areas that are considered hard to reach, that we can be there, we can understand what the people are facing, we can understand what the problems are, we can see how they're trying to solve them from outside the box, and then we can address them, because those views and their approaches also matter. My background in Sierra Leone is I serve as the Chief Innovation Officer and the Minister for Basic and Senior Secondary Education in Sierra Leone. And the role as a CIO, as Chief Innovation Officer and Advisor to the President, where I started, is really to see how we can use science, technology, and innovation to drive and accelerate the Sierra Leone's priorities in the National Development Plan. We have a medium-term National Development Plan, and that development plan is used to inform development priorities. And the focus of that is human capital development. The plan itself is called Education for Development. And underlying that is data, information, evidence that are cross-cutting. And the STI was set up to support this process. And secondly, because human capital development is fundamental for Sierra Leone, we needed to build an ecosystem that supports and strengthens entrepreneurship and innovation. And my role very early on was there to build a team of young people, quite many different young people from policy, from design, from technology, computer science, from design thinking backgrounds, who can come together and work from the heart of government, from the heart of State House, in the office of the President, and work with other ministries, departments, and agencies, work with academia, and ensure that we are solving problems together and seeing how we can achieve the goals and objectives of the STI. And when we think about innovation, people often imagine that innovation comes from, I don't know, Silicon Valley or Germany or Singapore, but innovation essentially is just how you solve problems, how you think about a new problem or an old problem in a new way. And we understand that this can happen everywhere, and we see it happen everywhere. We see innovation happening in the villages, in places where people aren't as literate. We see innovation happening in how people address perennial problems in the urban area, how people address water problems, how people address environmental problems, how people address education and how they access education in schools. And for us, it is that everybody in the development chain, everybody in the citizen beneficiary chain and the government chain can solve problems. And sometimes, and as we're seeing, it is to address specific challenges like with COVID, for example, in the response to COVID, where we see collaborations between the Ministry of Health, between the Directorate of Science, Technology, and Innovation, with private sector. We see that those collaborations led to us developing what we call hybrid technologies and hybrid solutions. And those solutions include SMS and USSD, mobile applications, online, offline platforms that we use. We use drones to monitor compliance during lockdowns. We use big data analytics called data records to understand mobility patterns of people to inform policy. We're using biometric systems for our vaccine rollout program, where the so-called state-of-the-art technologies are used in Sierra Leone to support our response. And I think one of the things that are essential for us is that we can see this ecosystem, that this ecosystem can happen anywhere and everywhere, from Freetown to rural areas and beyond. For me, we've also seen that some of that collaboration is not just within Sierra Leone, it's not just within departments and agencies, but it is across countries as well. It's looking at seeing what we can learn from Senegal, what we can learn from Rwanda, what we can learn from what other countries in our neighborhoods are doing, what they can learn from us, how the solutions that we develop can be incorporated. And those things are both high end and low end. One of the things we did in my work as a Minister of Education was we developed USSD SMS-based dictionaries, which maybe perhaps take dictionaries for granted, but we use it all the time. Spell check, Google search, but people don't have access to those. And so we decided that we should build SMS USSD dictionaries for free that everybody everywhere can check, and they can sign up for Word of the Day, which I'm subscribed to as well. And every now and then I see words that I don't know and I expand my vocabulary, but now every child in Sierra Leone or everybody can access these things. It is that level of partnership and creativity that we want to see accelerated, that we want to see extending across the country. There's a future in which these ideas are not just coming from governments, but they're coming from everyone. And this ecosystem work that they start today, yeah? Innovate Salon has existed where young kids across the country are competing and solving problems. UNDP has a social good project that they've been working on with older kids, Sensi Hub, and a whole bunch of different spaces in Sierra Leone has been supporting innovation and entrepreneurship. And all of these have been bubbling up, such that by the time this government came in with the STI, we really are at an inflection point where we are seeing a lot more people who are being entrepreneurial and taking advantage of their creativity. So that future does exist where our biggest problems, our intractable problems in healthcare, with the economy, the informal economy, with climate change, with water and sanitation and hygiene, the solutions for those in our communities come from the community because they understand the problem, they can identify, they can build the prototypes, they have the education in schools informed by new curricular frameworks that are talking about 5 C's: creativity, critical thinking, computational thinking, civics. When you combine all of those, that future exists where kids can be solving problems with high local impact. Now, when I think about who needs to facilitate this, government has a huge critical role. And this is, we've seen is whether it's to provide the resources, the enabling environment with laws and policies and curriculum frameworks, whether it's bringing together the convening power of government. This is very important. And so government has to play a critical role. Academia is crucial. Private sector is crucial. All of these different components are essential for building an ecosystem of learning and an ecosystem of collaboration and problem solving if we want to see this localized, decentralized form of creativity and innovation. For me, because I also serve as Minister of Education, I have the privilege to be able to shape this from preschool all the way through to post-secondary school. And this comes in what we do in the curriculum. One of the things that we're setting up soon is a task force on creativity, arts, and music to see how we can support and include that in learning. Is to see how we can bring in a lot more STEM curriculum and STEM and engineering and agriculture and design thinking back into schools, and how we support those teachers to be able to teach students. These are all ways in which we can combine the curriculum with the national priority, with the ecosystem and innovation that exists. And for me, parts of this model that really exists is one that starts from the grassroots. That the difference between grassroots and underground and some bureaucratic person sitting in an office somewhere giving speeches that is very blurred. That I can give a speech that some child hears in his village, because I'm there in his community, and he goes and solves a problem. But that he or she can tell me a problem that they're facing that allows me to change a policy and a regulation somewhere. It shouldn't be linear or fluid in one direction, but they should be fluid. And when we have fluid systems, when we have models where government and the ecosystem and academia and private sector and the citizens are all connected, we will solve problems faster. We'll see the informal economy come in with the formal economy more. We'll see that solution sets that come out that entrepreneurs develop are solving problems, not just for the wealthy, but for the poor. Because those problem solving is what should drive the civic entrepreneurs and innovators. And there's value there, right? It's about value for people and value for systems. There are definite risks in this, by the way. I don't think it's easy. A lot of this requires capital investment, particularly if you think about manufacturing ecosystem, or even in connectivity. You're going to lay fiber and mobile connectivity and internet everywhere. It's huge capital investments. These are risks that governments and some partners have to take. One of these models is the Giga Network with UNICEF and several ITU and several partners, where they're front loading and looking at how we can bring connectivity to schools. Because then if we are able to mitigate those risks, then governments and partners are able to take advantage of issues of connectivity, issues of financing, regulatory issues, and then solve those problems. And this is where I think organizations like UNDP come in, because they have the networks and the systems, and they can lobby and they can mobilize and convene. The convening power, the mobilization, the ways in which we can mitigate risk and lower risk, and in terms of investment in Sierra Leone, for example, with UNDP, we're looking at digital IDs, and we're looking at these digital public goods with UNICEF as well, and mobile money and mobile payment. It's a risk that our partners have to help us take. The sandbox, we know that there's a sandbox with the central bank as well, to explore new payments and incentive schemes. That's what I think the innovation wings of our organizations, well, the development partners can come with. For me, I do believe in the future in which a girl in rural Sierra Leone can think of an idea and solve it. But that future becomes possible the more likely when all the players, government, private sector, academia, development partners, believe that that's possible. That they believe that that girl who has that problem understands her problem and can be a source of solution. It takes time, it takes risk, there's lots of risk, and there's lots of investments that we have to make, including in the human capital. But that's why we're here. That's why we're problem solvers. We can't prepare the next generation to think about how to solve the intractable problems of their time, then we have a big problem. Because there are going to be more problems that we have not thought about, we don't know, we can't imagine, that needs to be solved by the kids tomorrow. So they have to have the tools to think outside the box and to problem solve. Thank you very much for having me, and it's been wonderful sharing our thoughts from Sierra Leone.
Dr. Senge, thank you very much. I'm really inspired by your vision. Moving from the government trying to solve problems to empowering kind of people to solve problems themselves, and by convening together government, academia, the private sector, and so forth. But that vision of that person really having the wherewithal and the capacity to take on a challenge and solve it for themselves is really an inspiring vision for Sierra Leone, and I think a really inspiring vision for how technology and technology partnerships can come together and actually build that hyper-inclusive economy that you referred to. I'd like to just ask you two final questions, if I may. First is, somebody that has the title of Chief Innovation Officer in a country, where did that come from? That's amazing. Is there a bit of a backstory? Because I think you happen to be the first CIO of a country that I've ever met, and so I'd love to get a bit of that backstory if I can.
Yes, my position as CIO came about because the president believes that science and technology is the future, and it has to be at the heart of government. And in a lot of conversation, I was in private sector. I was private sector research, and His Excellency President Liu asked me to come to serve, and he had this vision for what he thought we should be doing, and it was based on innovation at the highest levels. And what the position was Chief Innovation Officer for the government and advisor to the President. And it's been wonderful to go from one person to 60 plus people, from young people from all over the country, in Sierra Leone, locally, internationally, all fields, solving problems in all sectors, really.
That's incredible. From one person to 60 people. That's quite remarkable, and quite a statement around how important innovation is from the highest levels of Sierra Leone down all the way in your environment. One last little question before we sign off. I would like to get to know kind of, what are you most excited about? You've told and shared your vision with us. I think you've really helped to clarify what the possibility is and kind of where you're headed. But I'm just kind of curious, what are you most excited about?
That I'm most excited about, for me personally, creating and creativity. I make music. I'm excited about where the art form goes, how music and art and things that young people do. Generally, everybody can make music, but things that young people do play, that many more people can play, but how we can change the world through play, how we can change the world through fun, through how we enjoy it. Sometimes you need to be hoorah and harsh and like burn things, but I think you can also change the world without burning things every day. And through fun, through music, through creativity, and I'm excited about that.
Well, I appreciate your time, Dr. Senge, and I really appreciate you sharing with us a lot more about Sierra Leone and the journey that you're on, and the important role that everybody plays kind of in helping make that happen. And want to wish you all the very best, and looking forward to see the next steps that are taken in Sierra Leone, and more importantly, watching your vision unfold, in the days, months, and years ahead. Wishing you all the very best. Thank you, Dr. Senge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next step on this conversation journey is a global panel moderated by Pascal Finette of Singularity University. I cannot wait to listen to the panelists explore how local economies can help drive innovation ecosystems and how public-private partnerships can help foster them. On the panel is Dr. Tia, our economist, Shamiso, our explorer, Abir, our government innovator, Tom, the inventor, and Hema, our grassroots entrepreneur. On this panel, we will really start to discuss how we should think about refocusing the lens on people before technology, the role of the public sector to support local private entrepreneurship, the offer to step back and use purpose to drive prioritization and focus, and finally, how experimental, experiential, immersive learning, diversity, and a consistent and constant focus drives innovation forward. Pascal, turning this over to you, really looking forward to it.
Hey, thank you so much for dialing in here and joining us on this incredible panel. We will have an amazing time with a fantastic group of speakers and panelists. And this is going to be not your average panel where I'm going to ask a question and everybody will answer the question and say, I'm agreeing with what the person just before me said, and let me just say it in my own words. This is going to be a dinner conversation, and we want to, of course, talk about local economies, innovation ecosystems, and how private-public partnerships can really foster this. And we have assembled truly the best people to talk about this I can even think about. And with that being said, let me do a very quick round of introductions, and not in my own words, because I will butcher any form of introduction I could possibly put out there. So we will have our panelists briefly introduce themselves, just telling us a little bit about who they are, what makes them uniquely positioned to be on this panel, And I have a wildcard question for them, which I ask you to answer in a single sentence or 2-sentence max, which is, if I were to catch you on a leisurely Tuesday and you have nothing else to do, what is it you would do? So with that being said, I know already everybody's like, oh my God, shit, this is a hard question to answer. But with that being said, we will go in the order of people I see on my personal screen, and we'll start with the wonderful Tia.
Thank you very much, Pascal. That was quite an introduction. And if I may, I'd love to answer your question first. If you leisurely found me on a Tuesday doing something that I just don't happen to want to do, it would be gazing at the clouds. I find looking at clouds such a calming activity because they move so slowly. And there's just so much diversity in the way that the textures and colors and light and the way that they make me feel. So that was the answer to that. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Tia Kansara. I'm the Executive Director of Replenish Earth. We're a climate resilience and adaptation consultancy. We've helped something close to 90 governments, 120 businesses on their ESG strategy, risk, and mitigation targets. I'm an economist. I've worked with the likes of the Bhutanese government on introducing well-being, the World Happiness Report, the World Happiness Foundation. I've worked with cities around the world, all the way from, Ecuador to Japan on their strategies to be smart. And I've also challenged that with unsmart cities. And I think core to a lot of my work is how communities can have the support, especially in the global south, to have access to technology, to create opportunities for them in partnership. And I'm very excited to be here today, Pascal. Thank you.
That's awesome. It's great to have you here. I love the clouds and sky gazing and an activity I think we should all do probably more often to calm down and slow down. We will speed up though. We will do the exact opposite, and I will have the wonderful Shamiso introduce herself.
Thank you, Pascal. I mean, I love Tia's explanation, and I think I love how she started with her Tuesday. So I'm going to start with mine. I think as I'll get into it, I'm the head of exploration for UNDP Accelerator Lab. So for me, I'm an explorer. So I would be out trekking somewhere in the mountains of Zimbabwe alone, because I enjoy that time of just being on the track, listening to nature or to music, and just reflecting on life. So that's what I'll probably be doing. I don't know, maybe. So yes, I'm head of exploration for the UNDP Accelerator Labs. We are a fairly new initiative by UNDP, where we've been brought on to reimagine society in the 21st century. So my role is primarily focused on bringing uncommon partners to the UNDP system, as well as just looking out for weak signals of change and seeing how we can use innovation and technology to help solve some of these solutions or problems that we're seeing in our space. I'm very passionate about the digital space. My background is in mobile for development, where where we see the power of mobile and how it has a power, especially in the global south, to reach grassroots communities, whether it's with behavior change information, or whether it's just with information that they don't necessarily always have access to. I think we usually forget that internet is so easy for us to access on the tip of our fingers, but not all mobile phones have access to internet. So I'm very passionate about looking at other mediums of mobile phones to get information to communities. Thank you, Pascal.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much, Shamiso. And I definitely do want to go trekking with you, even if you just said you want to do it alone, but it sounds like a lot of adventure. I'm not quite sure about listening to music while I'm on the trek with like all the wild animals, but clearly you have an appetite for risk. Talking about which, let's move from Africa to the Middle East. And Abir, welcome to the panel. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Pascal. So let me start with introducing myself. Abir Tahlak. I lead the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation here in the UAE government. It's an organization dedicated to promoting and building capability around public sector innovation and experimentation, as well as my other capacity as the Director of Possibilities at the Ministry of Possibilities. It's a space, a platform for creating and disrupting government, opening those can of worms that no one would want to touch. The main intention is and will always be to tap into disruptive solutions for those critical government problems and systems. The UAE has been a strong believer in the role of technology and innovation in disrupting even how government itself operates and how it provides its services or how it develops better policies. And I think now with COVID going on has shown us that governments that don't leverage on technology or innovation effectively can essentially come to a stop or a pause. So again, we at the Ministry of Possibilities, we're continuously exploring ways in which technology and other means can be applied to disrupt government. And if I may come to your question, I think with everyone, wanting to go out in nature, I think with everything all of us are doing, I think if we find some time we'd really slow down. So I have one of two options. You'd either find me no shoes, walking on the beach or the desert. We're in Dubai, so we have the pleasure of having the beach 5 minutes from home, and then 10 minutes you're in the middle of the desert. So I think that's amazing. Or what, to be honest, I might be just on my sofa in my living room catching up on shows.
That is a good choice, and I might say that I envy you for your title. That is clearly the best title you can ever put on a business card. And I have to celebrate the government to actually even create not only the title but a whole department around this. This is just really truly bold, and we'll get into this in a minute. Tom Chi, a dear old friend of mine. Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so lifelong inventor and technologist, worked at Microsoft, Yahoo, Google. At Google, I was one of the founding team members of Google X, where I was part of the leadership team, which created and ran the teams that invented the self-driving car, Google Glass, Project Loon, the contact lens that can measure your glucose levels. So a bunch of background in creating new technologies and innovation, both on the hardware and software side. And relative to this work, I've spent a lot of time with social entrepreneurs, mentoring social entrepreneurs. I'd say roughly 1,000 so far. I've either taught or lectured or worked with closely in my career to date in countries all around the world. And yeah, relative to the stuff I'm doing today, I am the founding partner of @ONE Ventures, which is a firm that is dedicated to investing toward a world where humanity is a net positive to nature. So we basically look at the sorts of inventions that can reset the industrial economy so that the net output of the industrial economy is harmonious with the ways that nature works. So yeah, and if you want to check out that work, you can go to @oneventures.com, or you can check out my work more broadly at tomchi.com. I have a bunch of online courses, and you can also a bunch of free lectures online. Ta-da! Okay, what would I do on my free time? I know actually what I am doing in my free time is I'm building a coral planting robot. So it probably tells you a lot that my free time is basically another form of work, but it's fine. I find it extremely enjoyable. So it's great.
I love it. Let me turn to our next speaker, our next panelist, dialing in from Singapore, but originally from India. Hema, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then, of course, my famous Tuesday afternoon question.
Oh, thank you so much, Pascal. It's such a pleasure to be part of this event forum. I thank EY and UNDP for giving me this opportunity. I have been a grassroots entrepreneur for the last 25 years. We wanted to, more in most of my ventures, we have been doing things that are faster, better, cheaper. we want to create product and solutions. Okay. So in my last venture is where we manufactured electric scooters, solving the problem of affordable transport for a person living in a tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 town of India. Okay. Here is where we experimented, we innovated, we created disruptive solutions to solve the problem of mobility for rural India. I must say that the whole journey was extremely insightful, exciting, and there's a huge, huge opportunity to create significant impact for people at the bottom of the pyramid in this sector particularly. And in my free time, I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs that are actually solving societal problems. And coming to your Tuesday question, I think if I'm free on a Tuesday afternoon, I would definitely try a recipe with my daughter, a vegan recipe with my daughter. I think that's what I would do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You will hopefully agree that we clearly assembled a rock star panelist group here to talk about this topic, about how do we actually build and sustain and grow innovation ecosystems, public-private partnerships, etc. And I want to start us off. We are at the UNDP event, of course, so we have to start here. With that being said, Shamiso, you already talked a little about your role and the work you're doing. Probably if I could ask you to elaborate a little bit more in and talk a little bit more, how do you specifically, concretely reimagine like development in the 21st century? How do you build these uncommon partnerships to support local communities and local economies?
Thanks, Pascal, for that question. And I think it's a very important question, especially in the times that we live in, where we're trying to build back better, where we're reimagining societies and environments around us, where the future is looking so much more different than we ever imagined. So I think for us as UNDP, it's turning the lens back on the people themselves. And what I mean by that is that if we look around us, if we look around in the communities that are surrounding us, people are solving their own problems. As complex as the challenges are, people are getting on with it and solving their own problems. So they are innovating, they are creating, and they're passing on knowledge and solutions to address needs unmet by policies and market access. So us as UNDP, as we turn the lens back on the people and how they're innovating and solving their own problems and reimagining their spaces, we are partnering with, yes, traditional partners, but uncommon partners, like you said, Pascal, to accelerate some of these solutions. Whether it's partnering with a motor company to launch an initiative dedicated to celebrating bottom-up innovations, or whether it's connecting local innovators. And again, I'll mention, because I'm part of the Accelerator labs, we're tapping into these local innovations to try and create actionable insights to reimagine sustainable development in the 21st century. And I think, again, going back to just answering that on bringing innovative partnerships to accelerate solutions, we're also looking at partnership with the creative sector. I think when you think about UNDP, you would never imagine us partnering with the creative sector to basically accelerate some of the solutions that are needed by local communities. And I'll give an example. Recently, I partnered with the creative sector in Zimbabwe at the start of the pandemic. And it was mostly artists and designers. And the artists were really using virtual reality to show themselves in a new reality. But they used that to stimulate conversation on social media, actually, around what new skills have you learned in your community? And what new skills have you learned that you are actually sharing with the rest of your community during the lockdown, during the pandemic? And we found that a lot of people engaged with these artists because they were familiar with them. They were familiar with them. They felt comfortable sharing what was going on in their communities and how they were solving their own problems. And I can give an example of a young, I think he was 16 years old. He used to be a street vendor because Zimbabwe has one of the largest informal sectors in the world. I think we're the second largest informal sector in the world. And he's 16 and he was a street vendor and there were lockdowns. So he decided to innovate within his community by getting a whole group of not just young people, but older people to farm together. So they started collectively farming and they developed a new skill. And as UNDP, I think this is really, really important because we're using these partnerships not only to bring attention to these local solutions, but how can we also scale them? So that's it in a nutshell, Pascal.
I love it. Abir, do you mind if I turn the question to you, because I'm really fascinated to think about from a governmental perspective. How are you approaching this? And also, again, the UAE being such a role model in this regard for governments around the world, I'm curious, what do you think we can all learn from the experiments and the approaches you're taking in based out of Dubai?
Sure. So I think if try to answer this question from the UAE government's perspective, and at least from the role that I play, is I think from the UAE experience, I should say we were fortunate that a lot of attention and investment was given and set, to be honest, even way before, at least the last decade or before, is where the whole focus on, innovation, technology, creating those platform and tools that we as a government can actually have a space and permission to try, to experiment, to even as simple as disrupt ourselves. I think COVID-19 just accelerated the move towards at least digitalization, if I may say, but the whole shift towards, the whole remote operations that we're all, and we're currently in one. I think the UAE was able to quickly shift to those new norms, to this whole virtual digital world. At the same time, never stopped. So government never stopped. I think schools never stopped. Health service, and the list can go on. So I think this whole smooth and easy shifts in the current situation just showed us more that we as a government, we actually embraced this way before. So as an example, so the start of, or the need of having a champion in the core of government as the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation, actually, if you think about it, was a whole proactive move to continue this drive. At the same time, back in 2014, when the whole national innovation strategy came out of the UAE, so a whole strategy and agenda was set to drive and push innovation and support different strategies, that focuses on a lot of different sectors. We had priority sectors that we as a government would want to focus on. There was an appointment of chief innovation officers in the federal government that came exactly after the launch of the strategy. The president even named the whole year, 2015, as the year of innovation in the UAE. So, and after that, when everyone's like, oh, budget is a problem or budget is an excuse, and then the UAE government ensured a 1% innovation budget out of the federal budget to be dedicated to that. So I think those are all efforts that the UAE as a government has done and is still supporting to ensure we instill it. So we know that, just talking and raising awareness on innovation and public sector and agility and, public engagement, those are good words to say and, flashy headlines, but we in the UAE take it serious, at a strategy agenda setting level, at a building capability level, on an operational level, and ensuring that we follow up, we document, we ensure that those practices and tools, actually, like the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Government Innovation as a body, the Ministry of Possibilities as an entity, as a new typology in the federal government to have a remote kind of with no specific minister there. You have the government accelerators for the UAE government to accelerate, and the list goes on. So even the belief and the intention of leadership to have those official entities and spaces can tell you so much of how we take things seriously here in the UAE.
I love that. Hema, we've got people like Abir here, clearly coming from the governmental sector. We've got the UNDP, our gracious host here, being a non-governmental organization. From your perspective, talking about these local innovation ecosystems, the on-the-ground work, what do you think is their role and what do you wish from them? What is it, where can they actually drive value for people like you on the ground doing the work?
Okay, excellent. One of the things that what I have been thinking and I've been deep diving is that if every problem that they identify need not necessarily be a white paper and a research paper submitted, okay, it should be taken back. They should match with the local ecosystem, particularly entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs are the ones that are risk takers. They can take the risk, and if they see value, if they see contribution, I think they should come together and then solve that problem in a nice manner to be able to fix that one problem. We don't have to take necessarily huge problems, but take a small problem, for example, right? And then work with the entrepreneur. The other thing that I also feel that organizations like UNDP, which are so easily approachable in terms of because they're not government, right? We can actually reach to them to tell them that if they're able to make patient capital available for such entrepreneurs, I think it will be very, very good. Today, access to capital is very difficult. In my own venture, it was such a struggle actually, because the product works, there is a market created, but when commercial investors comes, most of the ventures are vultures, right? They're looking at how they can actually give you certain money, and they wanted 5x and 10x return. And that don't come in 3 or 5 years. It takes 10 years, 15 years to create. Do the ventures are willing to patiently wait? Yeah. So that's a second challenge. And then the third support that the UNDP can offer is, of course, in terms of continuously evolving to create leaders. Because I think that what I see in my own venture for the last 12 years in this electric vehicle venture, Pascal, I was able to create 2 women managers in 12 months, right? In 12 years, sorry. Okay. I was not able to create one leader, for example, right? It's very that difficult, okay? Because the ecosystems are sometimes can be stifling for people to be able to take that risk and all that. So I think to summarize, I think if the correct entrepreneur is matched to the problem that UNDP is solving, and if patient capital is available, and the leadership training, engagement, the way that you kind of work with them continuously evolves, I think we can really form something very formidable. And I'm very happy and I'm willing to volunteer for any such causes where UNDP will work.
Tia, if I could ask you, I know that you've done a lot of work both in the public and the private sector, and have done a lot of work in developed countries, highly developed countries. You mentioned Tokyo, clearly as one of these lighthouse places. I'm curious, if you look at this perspective from your perspective, what is the thing you tell your clients? What is it you shout at them, as in, you have to do this if you really want to make this successfully? And what is the stuff you say, like, don't do this, please don't, it's futile?
I love that question, can I just say. One of the things that I love to get my clients to do, whether they're working in government or whether they're a 5-year-old child that is about to go into a multi-sensory experience in Goa, it is pause, stop. Surprisingly, we're on the move so much. We're thinking so fast. We're stressed. High cortisol levels reduce the impact of any kind of educational environment. We have multiple tasks that we're trying to do at any one given time, but we're not able to prioritize them, and therefore we don't actually get anywhere. So sometimes for my clients, it's just to understand what's your priority and how can we reframe it? How can we pivot? How can we find new ways of creating a reality that didn't exist because you didn't imagine it? And imagination doesn't happen in chaos. It also doesn't happen in rigidity. So often, whether you're a 5-year-old child that's about to go into one of our exhibitions or courses, or we're sitting down with you in a village and we're teaching you a new word by an image, or we're sitting in the government and really understanding what your data is showing on the entirety of the city of Tokyo or London. It is often that there is a purpose behind what you're looking for, and often those purposes are humane, but they're kind of covered by, you know, expectation, competition, and translated in ways that are less about humanity. And so one of the things that I do try to steer clients away from is learning. And with that pause is learn to unlearn, learn to take things off your basket, learn to go deeper, learn to focus on something and keep on going, kind of like the beautiful design skills that we learn. Keep on asking, keep going there. Because, you know, when you take a broad perspective, everything was imagined somewhere, somehow. And forever, things may be imagined somewhere, somehow. But to bring it into the present moment is, I think, where the real jewels of our work lie. You know, something that could be emerging, I'm not just talking about digital serendipity, I'm talking about physical serendipity. It's like looking at the clouds, right? What are you missing? Because if you've got a one-track mind and all you see is 1%, you've made a decision based on something that could have been 100% awareness. And so where can you take a step back and, yes, appreciate the meta, but also appreciate the micro? And as all scientists, and I'm sure everybody on this panel will tell you, even the micro, when you go in and you zoom that out, there is another micro there, and it continues. And so really taking that into appreciation in those decisions, in this strategy, and recognizing where you can go with that is actually really, really fun.
I love the emphasis on the learning and the focus. And Tom, if I may like throw the mic over to you, knowing that you are truly the grand master of the rapid prototyping mindset, and a lot of your work is really anchored in turning conjectures into actual understanding and actual factual knowledge. I'm curious, what would be your let's say I'm the prime minister of fictional country X, and I come to you and say, Tom, help me build these innovation ecosystems, because I know now, having listened to this incredible panel, that they're insanely important to me. How do I do this, Tom? What is, from your perspective, like, what do you think is the practical steps I should take?
Yeah, just to add a little bit of nuance to what Tia was saying, I actually teach people to do a lot of learning, but there's a little bit of a twist here, which is there's book learning where people kind of imagine that that's what learning is. And for me, the book learning is, it's similar to, like, imagine you have a 5-year-old kid who wants to learn how to ride a bike, and you just give them a bunch of textbooks about bikes. Like, they could memorize every single page of those textbooks, and then you put a bike in front of them, there's nothing that they can do, right? So, like, the type of learning I teach people to do is not so much the book learning or the infinite analyses, especially if the analysis was for a context which is different than the context that you're trying to go and work in. I teach them to do as much experiential learning as possible in the actual places with the actual people that will be affected, and actually kind of inscribe it as one of the main things that people are trying to optimize, which is their rate of learning, which is how many key insights, like, materially move them forward that they learned from direct experience in the past month. And whatever that number is, like most organizations I work with that are not innovative, that number starts at 0. And by the time, I work with them for a couple months, and then it's up to like 45 things a month, where it's like, oh yeah, and last month we learned this, this, and this, and when we tried this, it turns out that this really pisses off the regional managers, so like we had to pull that back, and then we did so-and-so, and then we lost some of the people here, but that helped us learn so-and-so, so we redid so. And it's like, oh, I love that conversation in a couple months. Before, they're kind of like, well, we've been working on this program for 6 months, and we might launch it someday. It's like, oh my gosh. So like, to get to the other side of it, where they aren't so reticent to try things, and the conversation, moves into the zone of being about everything that they're learning and trying, and the next things that they're going to be trying, then that's typically what I'm trying to do with organizations. And just quickly building off of some of the other things that were said, Abir's comment that you guys are dedicating 1% funding to innovation consistently, that's extremely powerful. Like a lot of times people are like, oh, well, when we think of the big innovative project, then we'll go marshal up the funding for that in particular. No, it's actually way better to go pick an amount that you're comfortable with, even if it's like 1% or 0.1% of your budget, but make it consistent. So like, let's say you're a big organization and you have $1 billion to work with every year. And of course the UAE's got way more money than that, but whatever, just for simplicity of math. And then you can say like, okay, for 0.1% of that, that's like $1 million a year. And then you say, well, great, as long as you're consistently putting in $1 million a year, then in year one, you just try a bunch of things with a bunch of vendors. And then in year two, it's like, which one of these vendors really made a mark? And then you like sift it down by half, and then you try a couple more. And you do that for 2-3 years, and all of a sudden you have a really potent set of co-contributors. And then the last thing to throw in there, when Shamisa was talking about how they're bringing in artists, designers, all these unusual partners, that's extremely powerful thing. And in particular, I would, suggest that you find some partners that don't come with a lot of bureaucratic defaults. Because in the world of like, helping the developing world, then you've got all these kind of like agencies with policy and bureaucracy. And I know we're speaking at a UN thing, like I'm not trying to point any fingers, but like I will say that, also related to what Tia was saying, it's like when you work with these folks that have a lot of bureaucratic defaults, then there's a lot of things that they won't even allow themselves to imagine. And as soon as you go and grab some folks where it's like, oh, artists, designers, like, like people that just imagine the world from a completely different perspective, don't come with the bureaucratic defaults, that will oftentimes shake loose, a couple new insights or gems that you can build a lot on.
Can I also just add how powerful it is to have an immersive experience? Often we don't think about cities like that, products like that, services like that, but that's exactly what they are. We use our senses to understand the world. And often, instead of using those textbooks, I mean, this is what I did with a lot of my students across the world. When I take them on tour, even when I took them to meet prime ministers, it's give them the experience which they don't have words for. Because when you put them there, they find their own words and experiences, and they can translate something into a culture that may be alien to you, may be different from the values that you thought they were. They'll take away things from that experience, like students that I took to Japan, where they understood Rentai Sekenin, which is this community drive to keep the place clean. And coming from India, they thought, well, how is that even possible? Once they went there, they knew it was, and they wanted to bring that back to India.
If I may just jump in on 2 points, I think like Ministry of Possibility is just a 1.5 years old, by the way. We've been around at the Mohammed Rashid Center for Government Innovation for 6 years plus, almost 7 now. So I think the first part of what I was trying to comment is exactly, Tom, when we said, the 1%. So it's a 1% budget of the whole federal. So if you're a small entity, it's, in ratio. But I think the first at least 2-3 years was to just cultivate that culture of what is innovation. People like innovation, invention, creativity. When you say creativity, is it just about colors, paintings? You're talking to public sector public servants here, government, they're used to the official, of course, there's the cultural aspects of saving face, we cannot fail. This is very specific from where we come from as a culture, of course. And we going and saying, you have to try, but I'm government, I'm the expert, but we're shifting. I remember meetings with His Highness, the Prime Minister, His Highness himself, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, where he asks, have you asked the citizens? Did you ask real users? So when your Prime Minister, who is the ruler of Dubai, too, asks you a question like that and asks his public servants to, so that tells you a lot of, so when I say public engagement, involve the user. Users are the experts, not us who are on, in our offices here. Those are the users. So even as simple as, did you ask the user? And in my year and a half at the Ministry of Possibilities and the time-bound departments that came in, it was not easy. Easier said, and then all of you here know, easier said than done to get someone who's used to a specific way of, they're here, government needs to know the answer. They're here to, it's a definite answer. I need to know the points A to Z. When I come and then introduce, by design, by intention, make it uncomfortable to them, put them in this foggy, hazy situation, introduce information, make them experience new things. This is not comfortable for them. And I'm aware it's not comfortable and it's not fun and it's not, why am I here moments. But I think the beauty of working with people is as much as, we can learn, as Tia said, we should unlearn. We come with a set of expectation and experiences that, blindfold us. And there's a lot of things we still don't know why, traffic, wider streets, no. What is the real challenge, or what is the real, and you know what? And I think it's a balance between the trust in governments and how much we should know as a definite answer, and how much we are, again, experimenting, finding the whys and the hows. We're at an age where we say co-design is a beautiful word, but what does it mean in real life? What does it mean to co-design? We have to coexist. We have to co-learn together and co-unlearn, I think.
I want to pick one thing up, Tom. I want to acknowledge the fact that we are graciously being hosted by the UNDP, a large multilateral body, which might come across sometimes as bureaucratic. So I want to talk about, Shamiso, tell us a little bit about, because I do know that your work is far from bureaucratic. You are in the weeds, doing the work. Tell us a little bit about, what are lessons learned probably for other people who are, watching this right now and say, man, I'm also in a situation where I have to fight with bureaucracy, be it in the public and or private sector. And I'm just curious, from your perspective and from the perspective of the UNDP, how do you manage those pretty complex relationships and, clearly rules and regulations you have to deal with?
That's a really fantastic question. Again, I'll say it's a fantastic question for the times that we live in. I think what the pandemic, if we look at the opportunities, what it has presented for institutions like UNDP and others, is that it's made us more comfortable, like Abir said, comfortable to try new things, comfortable to be open to learning, like everyone has said on this panel. And I think for me, it's made my role a lot easier. So some of the lessons learned is I'm seeing that through innovation, number one is that innovation is not an afterthought anymore, because everybody has been forced into innovation. I mean, innovation doesn't always have to be technology, it doesn't always have to be digitalization. But everyone has been forced into a space of innovating, whether it's going online for a meeting, whether it's speaking to beneficiaries through technology tools. But I think the biggest thing has been moving beyond single point based interventions. I think in the past for institutions, and I'm just saying when I was outside looking in, was that institutions would tend to sit around on a table and design a solution and implement it. But I think now institutions are starting to see the power of going beyond single point solution and looking at innovation from a portfolio perspective. How can we roll out interventions that look at not just innovation, but look at bottom up adaptive innovation? Another thing is it really has provided a space for collaboration. And that again is innovation, collaboration by tapping into networks that maybe we wouldn't have originally or normally tapped into. So I think those are the biggest lessons, but I think the opportunities of this pandemic has really been pushing everyone, and not just, I mean, all these conversations that I'm currently having, everyone is looking at new ways of doing things. How can we bring people into the discussions? How can we bring new partners into the discussion? But I think ultimately, I hope we hold on to this and we really do build back better, build back differently, and not just be in the space that we're in and we don't really take on all these lessons learned. So that's my small contribution to that point, Pascal.
I love that, Shamisa. And it really reminds me to what Tia said about the pausing. Like the necessity, I think one of the big necessities for me coming out of the COVID situation is we always should really take a pause and really think about what do we want to take out of this in the positive sense of moving it forward. That being said, talking about pausing, I could have this conversation truly for the next 5 hours easily, but it feels like the last, whatever it is, 45 minutes have just flown by. So I want to do a last round of super rapid fire questions for you. And the simple question, simple, hard, short question I have for you is, what is it you are so excited to tell the world, which is helpful for the world, that you can't bear to not say it? What are you getting excited about when you think about the future as it pertains to, all our watchers, listeners out there, as something they can take out of this conversation? And again, super short, 2 sentences, because we unfortunately have to wrap. As you're thinking about, Tia looks like she's really hard thinking, so I will start with Tom Chi. I know that my dear friend Tom Chi, I can always put on the spot, and he always comes up with a brilliant answer. So Tom, if I could ask you, what are you super excited about, which is helpful for our viewers and listeners about the future? What is it which keeps you up at night here?
One thing that came to mind when Abir was speaking before about there's the culture where people want to save face and they want to present themselves as the experts. I'll just say, broadly speaking, that set of activities is really difficult to exist at the same time as innovation, period. And for the reason that people are in that psychology, I'm not trying to be like, oh yeah, these are terrible people, you must get them out of your organization. But the reason that they're in that spot is that there is this sense that if they get it wrong, it's going to be really costly for themselves and their career and their reputations, all that sort of thing. And what I'll tell you is what is more costly is to allow things to be systemically broken for a really long time. And that is way more costly than anything that might happen to a person personally. And really, you need to go replace that with the willingness to go try things at a small scale where the cost of doing a customer test where 5 people didn't like it is basically nothing compared to, oh, we have a thing with we have systemic racism over in the US that's hurting, hundreds of millions of people. Because I think it hurts the oppressor as much as it hurts the oppressed, but whatever. And we're fine leaving that in place because we're afraid to go and do the hard work, the tweaks, the experiments. And the communities, there are communities out there that are pushing and starting to do that. But that's the crux where the change happens, right? Let's do it at small scale. Let's do it, on the ground with the people that are affected by it. Let's, do it where that even if we were to mess up and it wasn't the best thing to roll out to these 40 people, well, at least you learned what you needed to learn and you can move on. So by the time it becomes something systemic where 100 million people are affected by it, then you're doing the stuff that really serves.
Love that, Tom. I love a huge fan of the whole learning mindset and the redefinition of failing. And I recently read an acronym. I just want to throw this in here to redefine fail as your first attempt in learning, which I absolutely adore and love. Tia, talking about learning and having given you now a chance to think a little bit about your answer.
You almost gave me way too long. Now I've got an essay. I wanted to yes and Tom, and I wanted to add that, the future is human. It is not machine. And I appreciate all the work that has been done in the kind of mentality of mechanizations and factory and making things as smart as possible. But ultimately, it is about how we actualize our communities, how we weave ourselves together, and we're able to stand on the shoulders of giants. If we don't have giants, we can't stand on their shoulders. So it's less about conquering and more about serving. It's more about regeneration. And, you know, just a final note, 75% of the studies that come back show us that loneliness, depression, anxiety, all of these things are environmental. They're epigenetic. That means that 25% is what we're born with, 75% is what we're not. And we've got a higher proportion of capability to shift and change than we do from what we're born from and with.
So Hema, also for you, my last question, the pivotal question: what are you excited about the future, and how can we collectively support you?
Excellent, because like I told you, I've already exited my other venture, which was making battery vehicles. Now I'm actually creating another disruptive venture, this time focusing on agriculture. Okay, because in Indian context, 88% of the farming community are small and marginalized farmers. Okay, and that's roughly 125 million people. What are the challenges that these people have? Okay, they don't have access to capital. Access to debt is a problem. They don't know how to sell the produce. For example, sometimes there's a middleman who sometimes can actually, what do you call? They understand the vulnerability of the farmers, and then they kind of misuse it. And then continuous training to the farmers in terms of access, giving farm equipments, farm tools in a very lease manner, for example, not in a ownership model for the farmers. So there are many challenges for these farmers, which we wanted to take one step at a time, and we wanted to solve it. And I think it is going to be almost another 20-year venture. It is going to be a long a journey for me, and it's going to be worthwhile because there are many puzzles that are there, and we want to solve it actually in a manner, because there is a rain shortage everywhere. Environment, the soils are getting degraded. Okay, it's depleted very badly, and then there is no dignity in farming because people don't want to do farming anymore. We want to change that, because we feel that today the farmers' children are educated and they don't want to see farming at all because they feel that there's no economic value. So if we are able to build a business case and show the economic value to such farmers and get their farmers' children back into farming and their farming community to feel very proud and say that, oh, I'm going to be a farmer, like doctor, engineer, I'm a farmer. I want to get that actually back in India.
That is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely love that. Abir, if I might throw the ball over to you and get your words of wisdom here.
So I think I'll base it on someone else's words of wisdom that we live, and like I take it as a statement to keep me going every single day. Is when again His Highness said that he is aware that the government that got him today is not the same government that would take him to the future. So I think this as a statement is very strong, and it gives us, even it gives me personally the permission to go and, like all of the amazing people here in the panel are saying, if there's something there's an opportunity to fix and disrupt a system that's been there. Of course, systems were there for a reason back in the 60s, 70s. They were there for a reason and put for a reason and made sense. But we're in 2021 already. What does it mean? Do I have to get stuck to those systems, or how will it serve me better? And I think again, impossible is not a word in the UAE dictionary. Hence everything we're doing. Happiness of citizens, residents, even visiting tourists of the UAE is a priority of leadership. And I think we're all here to serve that. So I think the North Star should always be there. And we don't have to lose track of it to understand the why are we here instead of being stuck in a specific system or mindset.
I love the outlook. I love the audacity, the boldness of this understanding that what served you yesterday might not serve you well tomorrow. And then also the boldness of saying, I'm going to change it, right? Because I think a lot of us can see it, but changing it is a whole different thing. Talking about change, we opened up our conversation with Shamiso from the UNDP, we close it with your statement. What are you excited about? What is the thing we should take into the future?
I think I'm going to echo what everyone has been saying, and I think I'm going to echo what Abir just said. You know, we are hearing all these statements about building back better, doing things differently, reimagining our societies. But I'm going to use the word that Abir used, which is disrupt. I think as change agents, as people who are really looking at how we can help our local communities, it's going to take a lot of courage. I'm seeing a lot of us on this panel are young. It's going to take a lot of us to disrupt this building back better statement. And what that really means is, what are we going to really do differently that is going to affect change? And I think people in the grassroots communities are already doing that. If you can take a walk in a neighborhood that is not your neighborhood, and just look at how people are already disrupting the narrative of building back better. So yeah, that's my last point, Pascal. Thank you.
I think, first of all, thank you all so much for being such absolutely incredible people on this panel. The work you're doing. Also, thank you just personally from the bottom of my heart for the work you're actually doing in the world. It is important. It is being seen. And we need more of you and all the people you touch and surround. That being said, I wish I could tell the audience right now, go out, take a walk, look at the clouds, but there is so much more to come inside of this amazing UNDP program. So with that being said, I don't want to interrupt or disrupt the flow of the program anymore. So we are going to be back in the studio with so much more content for you here at the UNDP program.
In response to the growing speed and power of new technologies, the United Nations Development Programme set out on a journey of digital transformation.
When we launched our digital strategy in 2019, we never expected just how important digital technologies would be to the world in 2020.
Virtual became the new normal. To cope with the crisis, digital transformation was urgently needed and accelerated rapidly. UNDP rose to the challenge. First, we digitized ourselves. We moved the entire workforce online within 6 days. Then we helped governments digitize. We supported over 60 countries with critical technologies, video conferencing services, and hardware supplies. We assisted governments as they moved their critical services online. But we didn't stop there. We learned lessons, applied them quickly, and shared with partners along the way.
Across UNDP's global network of country offices, we saw over 250 digital responses to COVID-19 emerge. The use of digital helped countries rise to meet new challenges posed by the pandemic.
UNDP Philippines supported marginalized groups by enrolling them into mobile wallets. This allows them to receive their cash assistance in a safe manner while providing them with options for financial services in the longer term, as well as empowering them with digital financial literacy. Overall, these aim to set the foundation for a more inclusive financial ecosystem in the country.
An inclusive digital transformation means providing access to affordable internet, helping citizens with digital literacy, and raising awareness of challenges such as data privacy and misinformation. Digital has an impact on all of us, governments, businesses, and citizens. Digital can not only improve the lives of people impacted by the pandemic, but also presents a new way and a better future.
Dominica has embarked on a journey of digital transformation as part of its wider climate resilience strategy. We envision that digital transformation will bring tremendous benefits across the board, this being the next economic frontier of our sustainable development. UNDP has been on the journey with us since the beginning and provided timely assistance.
We are part of a vibrant ecosystem. We work with other UN agencies, private sector companies, civil societies, and more. We collaborate globally to build consensus and move the needle.
The government of Botswana recently approved a digital transformational strategy. So UNDP convened partners such as the World Economic Forum through the 2030 Vision Platform it's co-leading, and UN agencies including UNICEF, so that we would have a coordinated response to the strategy.
We envision a future where everyone has access to affordable internet. We strive to help countries be inclusive digital nations. We pursue a whole of society approach where everyone benefits from digital transformation, building a better future that leaves no one behind.
For the next stop on our conversation journey, let me introduce Philip Tigo, Technical Advisor to the President of Kenya for Data and Open Government, and Sarah Sklarczyk, a researcher at MIT Media Labs. Two very different voices from different parts of the planet, one from the private sector and the other from the public sector. Highlights of their discussion ahead, let me point out a few. One, how policy and innovation need and should work hand in hand. The need to balance climate versus technology acceleration. An opportunity to lead with humans first and not leave people behind. And finally, the need for a robust policy and technology discussion amongst all stakeholders. Let's have Philip kick this one off.
Thank you so much, UNDP, for having us during this auspicious occasion to have this important conversation on how technology innovation can actually help bridge the digital divide, but also just help in the whole issue of digitization. My name is Philip Thigo. I'm Senior Advisor for the Thunderbird School of Global Management, but also I'm also a Senior Advisor for the government of Kenya. And Kenya, as you know, is one of the countries that is leading around technology innovation. I think this discussion is quite important, especially during this time when we have an accelerated pace of use. The current pandemic has actually showed us that technology is not just a public good, but is a basic human right. And I think for me, then this really is important for developing countries who do not necessarily own many of these technologies, but could basically harness its capabilities, especially from the global north, that has had a lot of time, but also has the capabilities to develop this. So I see an opportunity for collaboration in a very unprecedented manner. And this is where really I want to invite Sarah, who's really been doing a lot of this work out of the United States. And I think Sarah, potentially looking at her experience, and because they say we are leapfrogging, but I think my sense is that it's really not about leapfrogging, but it's really about collaboration, but also learning from a lot of those developed economies on how technology has been used to help, but also to enhance public good. So Sarah, what do you see as the big opportunities, especially from your vast and incredible amount of work you've done over in the US and Europe?
Well, first off, Philip, thank you so much. It's a delight to share the digital stage with you. And thank you to everyone in the audience who's joining. I figured I'd start by just giving a very quick sense of my background and kind of what brings me to this work. I'm an entrepreneur and investor in high growth technology companies with a focus on climate issues. I also do research at MIT on atmospheric carbon removal. In 2009, I co-founded a car sharing company called GetAround. I've also worked at the first company to develop lab-grown leather. And more recently, I helped take public a fleet electrification company called XL Fleet, where I serve on the board. So I'm delighted to join and to have this conversation. So in terms of opportunities, I mean, I think it's really a fantastic time to be working in technology. There's a lot of democratization happening around different tools. There's a lot of cost reduction happening that is allowing certain kinds of technology to become more accessible. So for example, biotechnology, there's been just tremendous improvement in cost reductions in terms of sequencing and synthesizing DNA, in terms of storing and sharing the resulting digital information, and an incredible improvement in the power of tools to do genetic engineering and computational analysis. And so in addition to these sort of hard technology advancements, there's also been sort of a more of a social movement towards making information and tools more accessible. So there's movements for people to sort of share their laboratory notebooks and process more openly online in a natively digital format. There's also been a very big open access movement in the last 10 years to make scientific research and information, such as journal articles, openly accessible for free to everyone. So these movements are certainly in progress. They're not done. Not all the information is as accessible as it should be. But movements like that really do open the doors to make really powerful emerging technologies more available to more researchers around the world. So I think it's incredibly important, and it's an incredible opportunity, particularly because, at least for biotechnology as one example, those kinds of technological capabilities open up the door to improvements across a wide range of economic activity with social benefit. So that can be improvements in agriculture, crop yields, resistance to pesticides, new treatments for human and animal diseases, and many other potential advancements.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And interesting enough, you're speaking about a lot of this advancement. When I see it from this part of the world, it's interesting that a lot of these things require a huge amount of investment. Of course, when I look at the West, there's really been a lot of many years of investment potentially, and not just in terms of the innovations themselves, but the knowledge base that actually drives this. In our case, for instance, we know we have a lot of innovation hubs. We have a lot of, our median age is 19.7. So we have a very interesting demography that can harness out of this technology. But the challenge, I think, in our case has been we don't have the kind of infrastructures that are there in the West. Our investments, for instance, even in simple issues like power, energy, either our energy infrastructure is not necessarily well developed, or in many cases, it's not necessarily current in terms of how its efficiencies. I think so. The kind of question that I have at the moment is that, yes, we have interesting advancements from the work that you've been doing, but also from the fields like biotechnology. But then you have now a continent that is in need of innovation, and most likely has to do this without necessarily the advantage of the kind of infrastructures that you have. And so I think for me then, what are the blind spots or the risks around having that heavy infrastructure of a well-developed economy, and thinking through how a less developed economy, but then really needs to innovate and requires to harness these capabilities without necessarily either going on a wrong tangent, but also or getting into debt. And we're seeing this now. And the other piece, I think, that when I'm thinking through this is the logic of development that has been around help. And so potentially, how does this help translate in actual ownership of this technology? So do you have any examples that you've seen this? Do you have any insights around the blind spots that you could advise? I think a lot of the companies that are in the West and are trying to collaborate with those that either in Africa, Asia, Latin America.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you hit the nail on the head by bringing up infrastructure, for sure. A lot of the technological capabilities that I referenced previously ride on top of robust infrastructure around reliable electricity, right? Sort of reliable access to hardware and computation, the internet, right? And high bandwidth communications. And so, I think anybody would be challenged to work at the cutting edge of any field with that access, reliable and robust access to that kind of infrastructure, in addition to, roads and bridges and other things we can for sure talk about as well. And so those are hard challenges, right? Those are not trivial, and they're not inexpensive. And certainly every country in the world has to rethink its infrastructure in the face of climate risk. We saw that recently with Texas, the energy capital of the world, wasn't able to keep the lights on during a likely climate change induced unusual cold snaps. So this is something that everyone needs to think about, and certainly how those factors play out in different areas of the world will absolutely be different. And certainly countries that have already built a robust set of infrastructure around the electric grid and other utilities are in a different position than countries that have yet to build out a lot of that infrastructure. But I would say that's also an opportunity for countries that have yet to fully build out their, let's say, electric grid, to think about how do we make an electric grid that's more robust to climate-induced unusual weather activity, which will become more and more likely as the years go by. How do we protect against other kinds of climate risks, like, let's say, flooding or fires, right? California and Australia have seen a lot of damage recently because of heightened fire activity. And then how do we also think about new technologies making the grid more robust, right? So we have a really centralized model in the United States for both, oddly enough, some internet architecture. Not going to get too much into that, but certainly for the electric grid. And there's now a lot of activity among startups who are trying to create a more decentralized model, or at least decentralized resources that can augment and add robustness and reliability to the grid. So that might be a large building with 100 tenants might have its own solar and storage to provide backup that can provide cheaper power during regular hours, and sometimes when there's excess electricity being generated, feed back into the grid or provide backup if the grid goes down. So the more that these decentralized resources get added to the grid, the more it helps in overall reliability. So not to spend too much time on the grid, but that was more of an example as to how we can think about building new infrastructure that can in some ways be better than the sort of old traditional infrastructure that developed countries have already invested in, right? We know more now, and we know more about what the future is going to look like.
Exactly. And that is basically, I think, the opportunity that I've been seeing in our region potentially, is because we don't have the legacy or the burden of history, right, in terms of inheriting 100 to 200-year-old infrastructure. But then I think in the work that I do, for example, I am with a university, which is sort of the leader in the fourth industrial revolution. But then I'm in a continent that is trying to harness these technologies. And so I think from your work and the challenge, and you've mentioned climate, and so we are in the midst of a technology acceleration. We're also in the midst of a climate acceleration. And so how do you strike the balance? Because then there's the urge to develop, but then there's the caution of doing it within planetary boundaries. Yet we also are supposed not to leave anybody behind. So I think from the kind of innovations that we've done, I think my sense is that, and potentially if you can just reflect on this, how have you been able to work around that logic, right, of not necessarily leaving everybody behind, working within planetary boundaries, but then sticking to the mantra of innovation? Yeah.
So there are parts of those challenges that are in some sense easier, that are sort of a win-win. And then there are parts of that challenge that I think are in some sense harder, right? They require more political buy-in from different factions, and they may have not everyone win equally, right? Somebody might have to give up something. And we need to push from both sides. We need technology solutions and we need policy solutions. I just, in terms of my career, tend to work on the technology solution side, because I think the more you can shift the equation of, what's economical towards what's economical and good for the planet and good for people, then those decisions become easier, and you get the pull of the market on your side. That's not a solution or the sole solution to every problem, right? And so,
I totally agree, and that's where you and me meet, right? So I've been heavy policy, and you are heavy tech, right? So and my sense, potentially, this is the future conversation that needs to happen, because technology wants to innovate, but then policy always is trying to catch up. So how do we close that gap, right? To the extent that policy enables you to innovate, but then the same policy ensures that the innovation itself, as you said, it's really accessible, communities are built, but then it's for the public good. And so I think for me, I find this very exciting. If we can create an opportunity where more tech, more responsible tech communities like you, and a couple of people like us who translate technology to policymakers can actually come on the table and sort of have conversations around how can everything that we do be of public good and not necessarily leave any sector behind.
Yeah, and Philip, so much respect for what you do. I think the policy side is harder, in my opinion. But I think it's really a larger concept of how do we make sure that policy and innovation are working hand in hand and not against each other, right? So if the regulations are so burdensome to develop something new that it's too expensive and it takes long, it's just something that the private market won't be able to support. And so some aspects of biotech have actually seen that hindrance to the point where it's strangled development. On the other hand, regulation is really, really important for making sure that there is fairness, that there's transparency, that there is accessibility of a new technology or capabilities underlying that technology to a broad audience. So, for example, we're still trying to get broad accessibility to high quality internet, even in the US, right? A large number, like millions of people in the US, do not have access to broadband internet. And I would imagine the numbers are not as good as that even in many other countries. And so, there's ways that we can use existing policy tools. We might need to innovate on new ones. And then there's also areas where technology can help. So we're now seeing this generation of companies providing satellite internet that might end up being more, I don't know, but it might end up being more cost effective than laying the wires to remote areas. We saw that with cell phones to some degree, right? Some areas skipped an entire generation of having telephone lines and just went straight to cell phones.
It's true. So I think based on that note, right? So what excites you as you think of the future?
Yeah, so I mean, it is an exciting time. It's a great time to be building and to be trying to solve problems because there's just so many more tools available, and the cost is dropping a lot for computation, for tools underlying biotechnology. I'm particularly excited about biotechnology and specifically some areas that have held a lot of promise for many decades, but have yet to sort of reach the cusp of becoming viable. So one example is gene therapy. I think we're entering the age of effective, safe gene therapies. I wouldn't say that we're there yet, but I think it's right around the corner. And that provides the potential to cure or treat effectively really, really difficult problems in biology. So potentially some kinds of cancers, retroviral diseases, maybe even orphan diseases, right? Where it's hard to sort of conduct a clinical trial on a traditional drug. So I think there's a ton of promise there. I think what we're seeing around clean energy and clean energy innovation and the appetite on the part of the public and businesses to adopt lower emissions clean energy technologies is really exciting. It's a great time to be an electric vehicle company or investor. And I don't know that you could have said the same thing 10 years ago or maybe even 5 years ago, with the exception of Tesla. I think we also have a lot of challenges ahead and a lot of risks. And I think you did really well to bring them up already around, how do we ensure equity and fairness and transparency? And technology innovation is not always the answer there, right? So I would also turn the question back around to you, and I'd love to hear, Philip, what you're excited about, and also what you see as maybe some of the risks and pitfalls ahead.
I'm super excited about, I think the fact that we can have this discussion, right? And to the extent that you can actually have two worlds having a conversation on what is possible. I think previously, this would not have been there. I think the second piece is I'm simply excited about everything is new, right? So we're all kind of on a clean slate because of the types of acceleration. It means that we're all searching, and that creates always an amazing opportunity. The third piece, of course, context is everything. I mean, I'm super excited that we can talk context. But then we can meet on the possibilities. It's not about copying or pasting what is in another side, but having conversations on building what is effective, efficient, but also is locally relevant. So I'm super excited about that. Of course, the risks I have is this technology determinism, right? It's tech first, everything later. I'm super excited that at least we can talk about responsible technology. We can talk about people first, right? And then technology follows. And to the extent that we are all talking about responsibility, right? Harnessing technology not for vanity's purposes, but I think for me, for improving people's lives. And you wouldn't think it would be at this stage, right? So everybody will be trying to make money out of tech or trying to get there fast. But then we are all thinking, and I think if this pandemic has told us something, is that we are all connected. and that no one part of the world can lead or move faster without understanding that they're connected with the other part of the world. So for me, this is what I'm excited about.
Yeah, this is a wonderful sentiment. I think, you know, we are absolutely connected. We're all in this together. I think we don't talk about that enough. And I think we get much further, much faster through collaboration than we do from sort of working in silos and not having this kind of discussion.
Naturally agree. And if you look at the two areas that we're looking at, right? So if you look at infrastructure in general, right? And the second piece is food systems. Those are the largest contributors towards greenhouse emissions, but yet are the most critical for a lot of developing countries. So it's very hard to say, listen, to transform your food systems to go greener, and yet we have a larger population under food stress. And then say you shouldn't industrialize in this way, yet we need that infrastructure, as our previous conversation, around driving our current economy. So for me, the piece would be, how do we do both within planetary boundaries, right? And so for me, then this is where technology innovation could be an interesting piece, but also because we're in one world. It's one planet, right? So as much as we're conserving here and somebody else is polluting there, it's a zero-sum game. We're all right? Together. Yeah. It's a zero-sum game. So I think this is where, in my sense, we need almost an extraordinary or an unusual collaboration, right? It's to the extent that it's not about one area. It's about how do we do it at sufficient scale, fast enough, to be able to ensure that we're within our entire development progress in the world, right, is within planetary boundaries. But then at the same time, is not leaving anybody behind. I think for me, that's always the issue. How do you do this without leaving people behind? Which I don't know if we can answer this question now or we will ever answer.
It's not an easy question. I think, exactly. You know, I think it's just, you need to make the sort of gold standard solution, whether that's like a decarbonized electricity supply or high bandwidth internet or whatever it is, you need to make it accessible and economical to everyone who needs it. And that's going to happen through a combination of making the technology inherently cheaper through innovation, and or subsidizing it or providing other carrots and sticks through regulation. But just sort of leaving these existential questions up to like traditional market mechanisms and just sort of hoping it works out is not going to get us where we need to go in terms of fairness and equity and addressing the climate crisis with the severity that it demands.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this amazing discussion. I mean, I've learned a lot in these 15 minutes. I think everybody would agree that we should have had a lot more time. But again, time is never on our side. So really, it's to thank the audience for having attended this session. I hope you've learned something from us. But I think for us, it's really not about what we said. It's really about what you can take from this, but also how you can apply this in the work that you do. Potentially, you've seen we're talking about how we are interconnected. And the basis of this conversation basically is to continue also outside this space and to think through how technology could be that enabler and not necessarily something that divides all of us or creates a new hierarchies or new inequalities. And I think for me, so I'm really excited about this journey. I'm really excited about UNDP having hosted us this conversation, but also thank you to the members of the audience for having attended this session. Sarah, do you have any last words or anything to say?
Yeah, so I just want to say, Philip, thank you so much for a fantastic conversation, for hosting. It was wonderful to hear about your work in Kenya. I wish we had several hours at the very least to hear more. Hopefully that'll be a future conversation. And likewise, I just wanted to thank as well the audience for attending our fireside chat, and to echo your sentiment that I hope people find something in here that's useful for them. And personally, I'm so excited for a decade ahead of building. We've got really big challenges, but it's also going to be a really exciting journey.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks everybody.
The final stop on our conversation journey, let me introduce you to Paula Santana, digital entrepreneur and CEO of Glass, and Kevin Starr, CEO of the Malago Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship. This final fireside chat will be a robust discussion between an entrepreneur and an organization that enables them. Some highlights ahead. How do we drive accountability to impact? What is the role of pioneers of technology and the new business models that they start to develop? How do we manage ethics and our approach to innovation? Kind of the balance between executing an idea versus the IP that an idea actually has. And finally, kind of how do we move impact investing more aligned to the impact versus the future profit that an idea might have? And so with that, let me turn it over to Paula to kick off this conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Santana, and I'm the founder and CEO of GLASS, the next breakthrough in government systems. We like to think of GLASS as a very simple suite of powerful tools for government decision makers, so we can take governments to the next level. In what next level? In the sense of empowering governments to see their own data, to understand what they're doing wrong, so they can self-transform. And we have here Kevin Starr from Mulago Foundation. We are going to be talking about local, our local communities, partnerships, technology, and how we're really furthering the emerging world and the rest of the world to really take everyone further, and how to alleviate poverty, and how to create solutions that are not just amazing at doing good, but also can do well at the same time. I think those are our common topics. So I would love to hear more from Kevin, have Kevin introduce himself and tell a little bit more about what they're doing at the Mulago Foundation.
Great. Well, so Mulago is a private foundation, and what our mission is to find and fund organizations that have solutions that meet the basic needs of the very poor. And our focus is scalable solutions. The idea being that we work with social entrepreneurs, who we define as people who have a big idea about change, or to deliver it to scale. And so our basic structure really is that we have a fellows program where a big referral network sends us all kinds of people doing all kinds of interesting ideas. We have a sort of a criteria around what we believe is a scalable, how we evaluate something as a scalable idea. And then we look at their ability to deliver, and we take them through a 2-year fellowship program that is focused on design for impact in terms of a model that could scale up, and then strategy to get it to scale. And then basically a lot of the tips around how to build an organization that a lot of other programs deliver, I think, at high quality. But the nice thing is then we're able to fund them coming out of that, and we're able to give them unrestricted funding, and we're able to stick with them for a decade and more if need be, if we're seeing that progress that really, we define scale as achieving the full potential of that solution. So it's sort of like a distant dream, whereas scaling is when you start to hit that sustained upward curve, hopefully exponential over time of impact, which is why I ended up teaching at Singularity too.
Interesting. So I'm just very curious about how are you really connecting the big idea, the moonshot, what we call like the long-term long shot? How are you connecting that with the day-to-day operation? How are you connecting that with the actual MVP, as we call it, those set of first steps?
Well, we think of every idea on its way to scale. The sort of journey to scale has 3 stages. And the first, and the one that Silicon Valley knows so much about, is R&D, where you're trying to get to a scalable model, which often centers on a technology or thing or product or service. And then once you think you have something scalable, you replicate it as an organization to really get it dialed in and prove that it's scalable and prove that it has impact. And then getting it to real scale often means that you can no longer be the only company doing it. You can no longer be the only NGO doing it. You have to recruit other NGOs, maybe get other businesses to imitate you rather than having to recruit them, or get governments to really replicate what you're doing. So at each, it's like in the first stage, you're a big lab. The second stage, you're kind of like a factory that still has a lab innovating. The third stage, you're like a recruiter of other factories. So your organization on the path to scale kind of morphs through each of these stages.
Yeah, that's some of the model we've seen, even though, you know, in our case, this is my second tech company and we're very small, but it's funny because, as you know, we say in Silicon Valley, pioneers are in the museum, but they're not in people's homes. So you create these devices or these pieces of technology. And if you are the first off, you were the one who actually cracked the regulatory framework. You were the one who cracked some parts of the technical problems. You were the one that cracked social perception of starting to use systems or models that were not native to them. But once you do that, what took you 10 years to do, everybody that comes after on this factory stage that you mentioned, they're just gonna be taking where you left. And where you left, it's gonna take them 1 or 2 years to catch there. And pioneers need to be, pioneers of tech, of models, of business models need to be okay with that, because it's not just where you are, but also you got some learnings that is going to take a while for other people to get it. And I think that that's the price and the pain of being ahead. And at the same time, that's the cost of bringing everybody and not leaving people behind, right? Like we cannot do it just us. So of course we will create models that will be so replicable that not only our partners will replicate, everybody will replicate. And then you're like, how can I even monetize, or how can I even take advantage of this, because this was my idea or my thing. And then, you know, when you go in the world and you're like, there are so many problems to solve, am I going to be concerned about someone copying my idea to improve the world? Are we really in competition at all when we are all trying to improve the world? So those are the things that, you know, I think constantly, and I'm wondering what you think about also people that is doing work similar to Milagro Foundation and that are copying some of the models that you have successfully replicated and escalated.
Well, I got a question I really want to ask you, but I'm going to briefly answer that, which is what I wish all the people, all the funders like us, I wish we were more accountable for impact, so that we were all competing with each other to have the most impact. So things started to look more like a market for impact, just like we have a very high functioning market for profit. But the question I wanted to ask you after what you just said was, the pioneers, are they kind of like sometimes sacrificial lambs? In other words, they do all that stuff you just mentioned, which is expensive and always takes longer than you think, and yet moves the ball down the field. But I wonder how often that pioneer company ends up taking the hit and somebody else gets to profitability off that idea. Like we had a really cool fuel clean cook stove idea, where the idea was to give an expensive stove to people that was super clean and then sell them the pellets to burn in it and make the money off the pellets. So that it was the only thing we'd seen that got these really good cook stoves potentially to scale. Well, the first company just was ahead of its time. The stoves weren't good enough and all kinds of problems happened, and they went out of business. But now we have another stove company that is literally taking everything that company learned, and we're putting money into them because we're pretty sure that this time it might work. But how often does that pioneer company just take a fatal hit?
All the time. All the time. One of the things we say that is the most important when you're gonna implement a solution, there are 2 keywords: product to market fit, which means in English, do you have a solution that solves that problem for that specific market with that specific set of needs at a very good price point? And the price point can be a price point that the user can pay, or the price that a partner can pay on behalf of the user. So things need money to exist, right? And to whom you're gonna pass that bill is part of the creativity of the entrepreneurs. It's like, who we're gonna pass the bill here? Who is more mighty here? Who can actually bear the cost of this? Because it gives them visibility, because it saves them some cost down the line. Like, for example, every time with my first company, the drone delivery company, Matternet, we were moving healthcare related, vaccinations or diagnostics and results. We were thinking, who is in the best position to pay for this service? Because we know it's not the communities that for decades haven't been connected to their local healthcare sites. So we know they cannot cover this transportation cost, but who can? Well, the ministries of health can. And then we're like, well, but governments are always strained with budgets. And then we're like, yeah, but if we can capture a disease in real time, if we can capture something ahead of its time so it doesn't cost more to government to actually treat this disease, then we're saving someone money, and we're saving actual money from the healthcare budget. So we think that there are ways in which we can provide a service, find someone to cover that cost, because at the end of the day, they are saving money from having to basically do another type of intervention, we would say. And we have actually proven that. However, we have been the pioneers, not just of the technology, but also of the model. And I have seen drone companies that were not doing drone delivery. And I have also seen companies in general that had nothing to do with the things we were trying to prove. And we have seen them taking not just our tech stack, our language, our pitch, our videos. And they have, and interestingly enough, with Matternet, my co-founder, and I have to give it to him, he was so picky about us being a future company, like a future-oriented company. He was so specific about, let's never talk about things in the future, because we are a Silicon Valley-based company where many companies die and are selling vaporware. Can we talk about the things that we actually do when we do them? And of course, we were always talking about things we did when we were actually doing them or after we had done them. We talked about our amazing use case in Malawi after we had done it. And then we see all these companies talking about, we are setting up the first network connecting the whole Africa with drones. And we're like, we could have said that, but we actually said that we did 300 flights in Malawi. They happen already. So we're like, why aren't we saying that? And then we're like, because that's not our culture. Our culture is to stop projecting so much that when we fail, we lack credibility on the things we do and on the things other founders do, because they're so far away. So, it was a decision. I could say that we didn't take advantage of that. And I can say that that was the right decision for that company. But I can see many other companies piggybacking of 10 years on drone delivery forefront from Matternet. And that has been the fact. And that is okay. So have we sacrificed a lot? Yeah, we have. Are we the pioneers? Yes, we are. Is that a cost to that? Yes, there is. It is what it is.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is you're working in Malawi, and we do more in sub-Saharan Africa than anywhere else. And we find that everybody fusses over and obsesses on the IP and the tech itself. And where we work, execution is the hard part. And we kind of tell people again and again, just stop fussing and worrying about the IP. That isn't what's going to make you succeed or not. It's execution on the ground.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think it's easy to tell to someone else, like, don't do these, or I recommend that you don't do that. But however, I think that we can say that because we got those things out of our system. So I was working a lot with the Hyperloop guys, trying to create these systems of high-speed transportation where you can put people inside a capsule, you extract the air, and because you extract the air of the tube, you can move that capsule very fast. That's what Hyperloop systems are about. And actually, they would be so they would stick so much to the point of we're the first ones doing this type of transportation. I would be like, guys, when we go to talk to, you know, Department of Transportations, of Ministries of Transportation around the world, these guys don't want to first off something that doesn't work. These guys want something that works. So let's get it out of our system. Let's talk to many people. Let's talk to our friends that were the first ones. So by the time we get to these ministries of health and these ministries of transportation, we're not repeating that, because this is something we need to get out of our system. It doesn't serve us when we're talking to someone that doesn't care that we're the first. They care if we are the definitive. They care if we are the ones that are creating a category defining product with tech, with experience, with model that can finally solve a problem that we've had for decades. So it's interesting because in our brains, we do want to be ahead. You know, we are creators. We want to say like, we created these, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, you're the first, go to a museum. And that's done. Like what you want to be is the one that solved the problem definitively and is being used by hundreds, millions, billions of people. And you're making their lives better because of the thing that you envisioned. And I think that that's more powerful. And I'm sure you see that on the work you do. Like, I don't know, I'm tempted to ask, tell me one big project that you're working right now that has been massively copied and that you're still at the forefront, and that's perfectly okay.
I wish I could tell you. You know, I feel like we're still in the infancy of figuring out how to use the market to serve the poor. Because what we're looking for, we kind of have this, you know, per your market, your market customer fit. We're looking for solutions that have a big, when we're looking for-profit solutions, we're looking for solutions that have a big potential market, but they have to be profitable enough to attract others to that business. And that's a big thing the social sector has missed. Like, sustainable isn't scalable. Somebody's got to get rich somewhere for people to be attracted to a business. But that means that the impact and the profit need to be aligned so that the more money you make, the more impact you have for the target population. So we end up with this sort of Venn diagram, and Milagros looking for stuff right in the center. And we think of those as like precious gems. And they're never going to take off unless they can attract real money. In other words, risk-adjusted market rates of return money, of which there's basically an infinite amount, but they're sitting over here and they got to do all that stuff you've been talking about. And so how do they cross that desert to go from an idea to real money that can scale things up? And that's where kind of we come in, where we're okay about funding that sacrificial lamb if it gets an idea closer to the mountains of real money. And so, but the problem that we've had, I'm very curious your experience with this, is you need cheap money to get to the real money. And cheap money is what we thought impact investing money was. And then we have found out again and again, there's not that much of that out there. And now our suspicion is all this $500 billion dollars that they say is in impact investing. I think it's all clustered and sitting and huddling over there on the market rate of return end of the spectrum. So it can't provide the cheap money that's going to get us across that desert.
I think that's the challenge. And that's the challenge we have. It's the challenge to prove that you can do good and you can do well, that you can have a long shot vision, and at the same time, you can work on very graspable solutions on the day-to-day that can create money that sustains the long vision. I think that's the challenge. And I would say that the fact that these solutions do not exist at both levels in a way that is sustainable I'm gonna take it back from investors and I'm gonna tell you it's your and my responsibility because we haven't been able to crack that model. So it's all there. The pieces are there, but I think it depends on people like you and I and entrepreneurs and founders that really want to push the boundaries of what is possible in terms of profit and impact at the same time to prove that that model can exist. But for us to prove it, we need to do it with our organizations first. So with that, I'm gonna thank everyone for joining us in this amazing fireside chat with Kevin Starr at the helm of this amazing foundation that is called the Mulago Foundation, and me talking about GLASS, that is a government ecosystem to take governments to the next level. Kevin, if you have any last words for our audience, please go ahead.
Oh, I just think finding technology is what's going to lower transaction costs, to make things more efficient, to be able to reach more people. It needs to be grafted onto something that would work without it, and it could make it work so much more efficiently, give it so much more chance to go to scale. So we've got another few hours of conversation to be had, but this is the best we could do in the time we had.
Absolutely. So thank you, Kevin. This was basically the point, to put fire behind all these things and the solutions that we want to see happen in the world now in our lifetime, and to create much more impact through leveraging technologies and bringing all those local communities back to flourishing. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, and see you soon. Stay tuned with more content that we have on this amazing event.
Thank you, Paula and Kevin. I really appreciate the opportunities that you're really teeing up for all of us. And on behalf of EY and this entire program, let me thank all of the speakers who have really shared new and interesting perspectives that are really going to make us think longer and harder about how we can use technology partnerships to transition to more greener, inclusive economies. And with that, let me turn it over to Rob for some final thoughts.
Thanks, Adlai. And I agree, what an amazing set of discussions today. On behalf of UNDP, I want to thank EY for the generous support of this event. Adlai, it's been great to work with you and your team to organize this session today. I also want to reiterate thanks to the speakers who've joined us today, and I want to thank all of you who are watching for joining us. We hope that the wide variety of speakers today has given you some concrete examples of how global and local partnerships can empower actors across different sectors to take advantage of the potential in technology, as well as to address other challenges that arise. These wide-ranging examples also highlight how many opportunities there are to get involved. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a government official, a development practitioner, or even a citizen, just as a citizen of the world, we want you all to join us in this global effort, not just to build back from COVID-19, but to build forward better and greener. Thank you very much.